Desperate, he made a tearful plea at his mother's graveside. "Take me with you because I can't bear to be alone." Today's heart-wrenching story, we meet Denis, a 7-year-old boy who faced an unimaginable tragedy. In a single night, he lost his mother, his home, and everything he knew as security. With no one to take him in, Denis was thrown into a cold and indifferent world where the pain of abandonment was his only companion anymore. What Denis didn't know was that this night would mark the beginning of something unbelievable. What if fate decided to intervene? What if a promise made on a deathbed could transform a life? This is a story of unexpected encounters, courageous decisions, and a miracle no one could have predicted. Get ready because this journey will touch your heart and make you believe that even the darkest moments can hold a thread of hope. Subscribe to the channel so you can access true stories that will make you laugh, cry, and reflect. It was a typical day for Ellison and Denis. The clock struck 6 a.m. when the alarm went off, and Ellison, as usual, was already up preparing breakfast. Denis, still groggy, appeared in the kitchen rubbing his eyes. "Good morning, champ," Ellison said, trying to cheer him up with a smile as she placed a pancake on his plate. "Today's your art class, remember?" Denis nodded as he ate. That little moment together was the only part of the day when they could really slow down. After breakfast, the rush began. Ellison worked in Atlanta, a bustling city nearly an hour away from Griffin, where they lived. She spent long hours at the office but never compromised on being there for Denis. He went to a school near her workplace, which meant that every morning, Ellison had to get him ready, strap him into the car seat, and tackle the city's heavy traffic. On the way, Denis would often gaze out the window, holding a small toy dinosaur that he took everywhere. "Are you going to get that new toy you promised today?" Denis asked shyly. Ellison chuckled. "If my boss doesn't schedule a last-minute meeting, of course." She did everything she could to make Denis feel as little loss as possible. Since his father had passed away years earlier, it was just the two of them. There were no uncles, grandparents, or anyone else to help, and Ellison faced life with determination. When the day ended, Ellison drove back to Griffin with Denis. The evenings were always reserved for them. A homemade dinner, an episode of cartoons on TV, and a chat about what happened at school. "Mommy, I drew a giraffe today," he'd say excitedly, showing her the scribbled paper. "Wow, what a masterpiece," Ellison would respond, making sure to appreciate every detail of the drawing. To Denis, his mom was everything, and to Ellison, Denis was the reason she never gave up. Even after exhausting days, she knew her routine was a sacrifice, but it was for him, always for him. It was a simple life, but full of love, and the bond between mother and son seemed unbreakable. The rain started lightly, just a mist against the windshield. Ellison glanced back and saw Denis, already asleep in his car seat, still clutching the toy dinosaur in his hand. It was a peaceful scene, but Ellison knew she had to stay extra alert on the road. "Tonight, we're having lasagna," she whispered as if he could hear, smiling to herself. The streets grew wetter now, and the sound of tires slicing through the water grew louder. As they went on, the rain intensified, and the windshield wipers struggled to keep up. The streetlights shimmered blurry and distant, and the highway traffic was heavier than usual, with large trucks dominating the lanes. A truck sped past their car, creating a curtain of water that blinded Ellison for a few seconds. Denis shifted in his seat, mumbling something, but fell back asleep. "Almost home," Ellison murmured to herself, trying to stay calm as she gripped the steering wheel tightly. Then it happened. Another truck, attempting to overtake on a sharp curve, skidded and lost control. Ellison had no time to react. The impact on the side of the car was strong enough to throw them off the road, straight into a ditch. For a few seconds, everything seemed silent, except for the sound of rain hammering on the roof of the car, now tipped sideways. "Denis!" Ellison screamed, panicked, trying to turn her head to see her son. "Mommy, I'm here," Denis replied, his voice trembling. She felt immediate relief hearing his voice, but panic still gripped her. The seatbelt held her tightly, preventing her from turning to see Denis. "Stay calm, sweetheart. It's okay. It's okay. Mommy's here." The boy began crying softly, but his mother's words seemed to bring some comfort. Ellison pressed her body against the seatbelt, trying to free herself, but everything was too tight. "Denis, are you hurt?" "Answer, Mommy," she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "No, but I'm scared," he said. "It's just a scare, sweetheart. We'll get out of here soon. Stay still in your car seat, okay? Promise?" The minutes felt eternal. Rainwater trickled through the broken window, and the sound of footsteps outside indicated that someone had stopped to help. Finally, voices began to approach. "Is anyone in there?" a man shouted. "Here, please, my son is here," Ellison replied, her relief mixed with desperation. The rescuers arrived shortly after. Denis was pulled out first, still clutching his dinosaur tightly. When they finally managed to free Ellison, she turned to look at her son, but realized something wasn't right. She felt a strange dizziness and couldn't keep her eyes open. While Denis cried beside the ambulance, holding her hand, the paramedics worked quickly. What seemed like just a scare was far from over. The ambulance siren echoed down the road. Sitting on a bench next to the paramedic, Denis looked back at where Ellison was being treated in a hurry. "Is she going to be okay?" he asked, his voice barely audible. The paramedic exchanged a quick glance with his colleague but didn't answer. Denis knew something was wrong. At the hospital, everything was chaotic. Doctors and nurses surrounded Ellison while Denis was taken to another room by a young resident named Kevin. "Hey, champ, want a sandwich?" Kevin asked, trying to distract the boy while pointing to a vending machine in the hallway. "I want to see my mom," Denis replied, not taking his eyes off the door she had been taken through. Kevin sighed, unsure of what to say. Before he could insist, a nurse rushed by. Denis grabbed Kevin's hand. "She's going to be okay? She's hurt, but she's going to be okay, right?" Kevin crouched down to meet the boy's gaze. "The doctors are doing everything they can, okay? They're very good at what they do." Meanwhile, in the operating room, Ellison's condition worsened. Internal bleeding, overlooked at the accident scene, was more severe than the doctors had anticipated. Despite all their efforts, time was not on her side. After hours, one of the doctors came out of the room and went to Kevin. "She wants to see her son." Kevin took a deep breath and held Denis's hand. "Come on, champ. Your mom wants to talk to you." When Denis entered the room, he saw Ellison lying in the bed, her eyes half closed and a weak smile on her face. "Come here, my love," she said softly. Denis ran to the bed and held her hand. "You're hurt, but you're going to be okay, right, Mommy?" Ellison paused, holding back tears. "I want you to promise me something, my dear. Always be strong. No matter what happens, you have to be brave, honest, and take care of the people around you, okay?" "I promise, Mommy," Denis replied, his voice breaking. "And remember that I love you. I'll always be with you, in one way or another." Denis hugged his mom tightly, as if trying to stop her from leaving. A few minutes later, the monitors beside the bed started beeping. Denis was pulled out of the room by Kevin, crying and screaming for his mother. Hours later, while Denis slept on a small hospital couch, Kevin and one of the doctors were the first to deliver the news. Ellison hadn't made it. That was the moment Denis realized everything had changed forever. Without a father, relatives, and now his mother, he was left with a pain he didn't know how to handle. The emptiness he felt that night was the beginning of a reality he never imagined facing. After this catastrophe, Denis had no choice but to go to an orphanage. He arrived there clutching his toy dinosaur. It was the only thing he had brought with him from the hospital. A social worker accompanied him, explaining the rules and trying to sound welcoming, but Denis could barely pay attention. His eyes were fixed on the floor as they walked down a hallway, echoing with voices and laughter from other children. When they entered the dormitory, some beds were empty, but the noise of boys playing in a corner was deafening. Denis was taken to an empty bunk bed and given a folded sheet and pillow. "This will be your bed, Denis. You'll get used to it soon," said the social worker before leaving. He just nodded, feeling smaller than ever. On the first day, the other children watched him from a distance, whispering among themselves. It didn't take long for the whispers to turn into taunts. "Look at the cry baby," shouted one of the older boys as Denis tried to put his things away in the small locker by his bed. "Is he crying for his mommy?" mocked another. Denis clutched his dinosaur tighter, trying to ignore them. He wanted to respond, wanted to say something, but the words just wouldn't come out. The days dragged on slowly. The games in the courtyard were the moments he dreaded most. The older kids would shove Denis on purpose or take his toy and throw it far away. Once he found the dinosaur hidden in the trash. The staff seemed oblivious to what was happening. When Dennis tried to talk about the teasing, he received a cold look from a caregiver. "You need to learn to handle things yourself, kid. I can't fix everything for you," she said, straightening papers on the desk. With no one to defend him, Dennis began avoiding interactions. He spent breaks sitting in a corner, staring at the ground. At night, while the other children whispered and laughed in their beds, Dennis stared at the ceiling. The only thing that comforted him was imagining his mother beside him, holding his hand. He tried not to cry, but tears slid down in the silence. He missed the smell of the dinners Ellison used to cook, the stories she told, and the way she always said everything would be okay. Now no one said that. The feeling of abandonment was constant, and every day in the orphanage felt like an eternity. Dennis began to wonder if he would ever feel happy again. It was a cold, gray morning when Dennis decided he couldn't wait any longer. For weeks, he had been planning a way to leave the orphanage unnoticed. He knew he wouldn't get another chance. That morning, while all the children played in the local park, Dennis waited until the staff were distracted and ran. The cemetery wasn't far, but the walk felt endless. When he finally arrived, panting and with trembling hands, he found the simple grave of his mother, marked by a modest headstone and a few wilted flowers left by some unknown visitor. He knelt on the damp grass, clutching the dinosaur tightly to his chest. For a moment he was silent, staring at the headstone as if expecting it to speak back. "Mom, I can't do this anymore." His voice came out low but filled with sorrow. "You promised to take care of me, so why did you leave me here?" The tears started to flow uncontrollably. Dennis squeezed his eyes shut, almost as if trying to erase the world around him. "Take me with you, please. I don't want to be alone anymore," he cried, his voice trembling, his hands gripping the ground in anger and despair. That's when he felt something soft touch his shoulder. Dennis turned, startled, and saw a woman kneeling beside him. She had a calm smile, but her eyes reflected a familiar pain. "Hey, I saw you crying. Are you okay?" she asked gently. Dennis tried to wipe his tears but couldn't answer. He just shook his head. "My name is Kate. I'm here visiting my son's grave," she continued. "He passed away a few years ago, and I come here whenever I can to talk to him." The boy looked at her, intrigued. He wasn't used to being treated kindly since his mother had passed. "My mom, she's gone too, and I just want her to take me with her." Dennis finally broke the silence. Kate felt her chest tighten at those words. It was as if she were standing before her own lost son, but in another body with another story. "I understand what you're feeling," she said, sitting down beside him. "It's hard, I know. But I think your mom wouldn't want you to feel so sad." They sat there for some time talking. Dennis told her about the accident, the orphanage, and how the other children treated him. Kate, in turn, spoke about her son, a boy slightly older than Dennis, who had died in a beach accident. Kate looked at Dennis with concern. "Do you know how to get back to the orphanage?" He nodded slowly. "I think so." "Then how about I take you back? I don't want you to get lost on the way." On the way, they passed by a park where a carousel shone with colorful lights. Kate saw Dennis's eyes light up for the first time. "Wanted to take a ride?" she suggested. Dennis hesitated but eventually agreed. When the carousel began to spin, he felt a small spark of happiness, something he hadn't felt in a long time. As Kate watched him smile, an idea began to form in her mind. Something about their connection felt larger than a simple coincidence. When she dropped him off at the orphanage, Kate hugged him quickly and promised to visit again. Dennis didn't know it, but that meeting would mark the beginning of a change he could never imagine. Kate stayed up all night after meeting Dennis. Sitting on the couch in her living room, she held a picture frame with a photo of her son, Ryan, as her thoughts consumed her. The boy at the cemetery had stirred a mix of feelings she couldn't explain. When her husband, Michael, came down the stairs, he found Kate staring at the photograph. "You didn't sleep again?" he asked, sitting beside her. Kate shook her head. "I met a boy today. At the cemetery, he was crying at his mom's grave, and I felt something I haven't felt in a long time." Michael took her hand but said nothing. He knew that when she began talking about Ryan, it was best just to listen. "I remember that day at the beach like it was yesterday," Kate began, her voice low and heavy. He loved the ocean. Every time we went, he'd run straight to the water before I even finished putting sunscreen on him. I turned away for just a second, and that was enough. She paused, swallowing hard. When I realized he wasn't on the sand, I started screaming. People helped me search, but it was too late. They found him in the water, and I lost everything that day. Michael squeezed her hand tighter. He knew the story well, but understood that Kate needed to repeat it, as if it lightened the weight she carried. Since then, I've wondered why I'm still here. What's the purpose of it all? I've tried to move on, tried to help others, but it always feels empty. She fell silent for a moment, as if reliving it all in her mind. But that boy, Denis, he made me feel something different. There's so much pain in his eyes, and he's so small, Michael. He reminded me of Ryan. Michael took a deep breath, trying to process her words. And what do you want to do about it? Kate looked at him with determination. I don't know, but I feel like I need to help him, like it's a sign. In the following days, Kate began visiting Denis regularly at the orphanage. During her visits, she learned more about his life and shared more about hers. My son, Ryan, was a little older than you when he passed away, she said during a conversation in the yard. Did he like dinosaurs too? Denis asked, curious. Kate smiled. He liked airplanes. He wanted to be a pilot when he grew up. Denis looked at her for a moment and then said something that took her by surprise. I think your mom misses you too, just like I miss mine. Those words hit Kate like a lightning bolt. For the first time, she felt that maybe she could begin to fill the void in her heart. Not by replacing Ryan, but by offering love to someone who desperately needed it. And, without knowing it, Denis also began to feel that there was someone in the world willing to stand by him. It was a sunny afternoon when Kate took Denis to the park again. Since the day they rode the carousel together, it had become a special place for them both. Denis ran back and forth, admiring the rides and the colorful lights decorating the park. While Kate sat on a nearby bench, Denis stopped near the carousel. That's when he noticed something on the ground, partially hidden under some dry leaves. He bent down to pick it up and realized it was a leather wallet, heavy and full. Denis looked around, searching for someone who might be the owner, but the park was relatively empty at that time. He carefully opened the wallet and was shocked to see several $100 bills stacked inside. That's a lot of money, he murmured to himself, feeling the weight of the discovery. For a brief moment, he thought about the orphanage, the difficulties he faced there, and how that money could help him escape. But then, like a distant echo, his mother's words came back to him. Be honest and considerate of others. Denis closed the wallet firmly, feeling a mix of guilt and determination. He walked to the park gate where a security guard stood, watching the crowd. Excuse me, sir, Denis said, holding out the wallet. I found this near the carousel. The security guard took the wallet and upon opening it, widened his eyes. My God, did you find this? This money belongs to Mr. Watson, the park's longest-serving employee. He lost it yesterday and was devastated. It was his Christmas salary. Denis looked at the ground, unsure of what to say. Kid, you have no idea what you just did. You saved his family's Christmas, the guard said, smiling and placing a hand on Denis's shoulder. Meanwhile, Kate, who had been watching from a distance, approached, confused. What happened? This boy here is a hero. He found and returned Mr. Watson's lost money. Few would have done the same. You must be very proud of him. Kate looked at Denis, who avoided her gaze, slightly embarrassed. She knelt down and gave him a tight hug. Your mother would have been so proud of you, Denis, she whispered softly. That day, something changed inside Denis. For the first time, he felt he had done something good, something his mother would approve of. And at the same time, he began to realize that Kate might be more than just a friend who visited the park. She was there for him like no one had been since his mother passed away. That night, after dropping Denis off at the orphanage, Kate couldn't rest. The boy's shy smile as he returned the wallet and the guard's words echoed in her mind. She lay down, hugging a pillow, and eventually fell asleep after much tossing and turning. And then it happened. In the dream, she was on the same beach where she had lost Ryan. The waves gently lapped at the sand, and the sun shone as it had on the happy days they used to spend together. Suddenly, she saw Ryan in the distance, standing near a small wooden cabin. "Mom, come here," he called, waving at her with a smile that seemed too real to be just a dream. Kate ran toward him, but before she could reach him, he handed her a small note and disappeared. Kate opened the paper with trembling hands and saw an address written on it. She woke up startled, her heart racing and sweat dripping down her forehead. Not knowing what to do, Kate wrote down the address on a real piece of paper, still intrigued. Was it just her imagination, or a sign of something more? The next morning, she mentioned the dream to Michael over breakfast. "Love, I had a strange dream about Ryan. He gave me this address." Kate hesitated as she showed him the paper. Michael looked at her, puzzled. "Did you check if the address exists?" Kate grabbed her phone and typed in the address. When it appeared on the screen, her eyes widened. "It's the orphanage where Denis is," she said, almost breathless. Michael set his coffee cup down, surprised. "Kate, that's a huge coincidence." "It can't just be a coincidence, Michael. Ever since I met Denis, I felt something different. He needs me. But maybe I need him too," she replied, clutching the note tightly. Michael was silent for a moment before responding. "And what if it's Ryan trying to give you an answer you've been searching for all this time? Maybe you should listen." Kate decided to go to the orphanage that very day. As she drove, the weight of the moment pressed on her. Each street she passed seemed harder to cross, and memories of Ryan came rushing back. When she arrived, she found Denis sitting alone in the yard, holding his toy dinosaur. She approached slowly, and the boy looked up, giving her a shy smile. "Hi, Denis. Can I sit here with you?" she asked. Denis nodded, and they sat in silence for a few minutes before Kate finally spoke. "Do you believe that the people we love can send us signs?" she whispered. Denis looked at her, intrigued. "Maybe. My mom told me she'd always watch over me." Kate smiled, feeling the weight of that moment. In her heart, she knew that meeting Denis was no coincidence. Perhaps he was the answer she had been seeking since Ryan was gone. A second chance to give love to someone who needed it, and an opportunity to heal her own heart in the process. The decision to adopt Denis wasn't made impulsively. That same night, Kate and Michael sat at their kitchen table, surrounded by papers and adoption forms. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the sound of Michael's pen scratching the paper as he filled out his details. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, looking at Kate. She paused for a moment and held his hand. "Absolutely. Denis needs a family, and we need him." The process, however, was anything but simple. First came the interviews with social workers, with questions that seemed to pry into every aspect of their lives. Then there were home visits to check if their house was suitable for a child. Kate and Michael had to prove they were emotionally and financially capable of taking care of Denis. At the same time, they continued visiting him regularly at the orphanage. Each visit seemed to strengthen the bond between them. Denis started to smile more, talk about little things from his day, and eventually call Kate by name. "Kate, will you come back tomorrow?" he asked one day. "I will, my dear, whenever I can," she replied, her heart aching. Meanwhile, Denis began having dreams about his mother. In one of them, she was in his room, sitting on the edge of his bed with a gentle smile. "You're doing well, my love," Ellison said. "I'm so proud of you." Denis tried to hold her hand, but she seemed distant, like a mist. "Mom, when will I get to see you again?" Ellison looked at him tenderly. "You will find a new family, someone who will take care of you. I'll always be here, but now it's time for you to be happy again." He woke up with tears in his eyes, but this time, something inside him felt lighter. The visits continued and the bond grew. During one of them, Denis asked something that caught Kate by surprise. "If you take me home, will I have my own room?" Kate held back tears and answered with a smile. "Yes, you will, and it will be just the way you want it." After months of visits, interviews, and inspections, the long-awaited day finally arrived. Kate and Michael received the official approval to adopt Denis. Denis woke up early, with a nervousness that made his stomach ache. He had heard stories of children being adopted, but he couldn't believe it was now his turn. Kate and Michael arrived at the orphanage just before the scheduled time. Kate was holding a bouquet of flowers to give to the social worker, a gesture of gratitude for her hard work. Michael carried a new backpack filled with clothes and toys they had chosen together for Denis. In the office, the paperwork was signed. Denis looked at the document on the table, not understanding all the details but knowing something special was happening. "It's official," the social worker said with a smile. "Denis, you're now part of their family." Kate opened her arms and Denis ran to her, hugging her tightly. Michael crouched down as well, wrapping them both in a big hug. "I told you it was forever," Kate whispered in his ear, trying to hold back tears. The moment was emotional, but there was still one more step to face: the goodbye. Denis went back to the dormitory for the last time to collect his belongings. As he folded his worn clothes and placed his dinosaur in the backpack, other kids began to gather around him. "So you're really leaving?" said one of the older boys, the one who always teased him. Denis looked at him, unsure of how to respond. "I guess, I'm sorry for everything," the boy said, looking down. "You're not so bad after all." Denis didn't reply, just gave a small smile before grabbing his backpack and heading to the hallway. At the exit, the orphanage staff, who rarely showed much affection, seemed emotional. One of the caretakers even kissed his forehead, something Denis didn't expect. "Take good care of them, okay?" she said, holding his hand for a moment. "I will," Denis replied with a small smile. When he finally walked through the gates of the orphanage with Kate and Michael, Denis felt something different. The weight he had carried since his mother's death seemed to be lifting. In the car as they drove to his new home, Michael turned on the radio, and an upbeat song began to play. Denis looked out the window, watching the streets go by, but this time the future seemed a little less scary. Kate turned to him and asked, "Ready to start a new life?" Denis nodded, clutching his dinosaur. "Ready." From that day forward, he was no longer just a lost boy in an orphanage. He had a home, he had a family, and he knew his mother was proud wherever she was. The first days in his new home were full of discoveries for Denis. He walked through the hallways with curiosity, stopping to admire the pictures on the walls and the windows that let sunlight in. His room was simple, but had something Denis had never had before: space for his own dreams. Kate helped decorate the room, bringing dinosaur stickers for the walls and choosing blue bedding to match Denis's favorite colors. "Is it the way you imagined?" she asked as Denis placed his dinosaur on a shelf next to his bed. "It's better than I imagined," he replied with a shy smile. The routine slowly began to form. Michael took Denis to school every morning while Kate prepared breakfast. In the evenings, dinner was always a special time. During one of these meals, Denis asked, "Can I eat here forever?" Kate looked at him tenderly. Of course you can. This is your home now, Denis." Despite starting to feel comfortable, there were moments when Denis still woke up in the middle of the night, missing his mother. At those times, Kate would often appear, sitting beside him on the bed. "Do you want to talk about her?" she would ask, and Denis would start sharing the stories he kept in his heart. How Ellison made the best pancakes or how she always danced in the kitchen while washing dishes. Kate listened attentively, sometimes sharing her own memories of Ryan. "My son loved running on the beach," she said once. "He said the wind made him feel like he could fly." These conversations began to create a special bond between them. Denis realized that Kate understood his pain in a way no one else did, and Kate felt that helping Denis was also healing a part of herself. A few weeks later, Kate suggested visiting the cemetery. Denis was silent for a moment, but then nodded. When they arrived at Ellison's grave, Denis placed a small bouquet of flowers and sat on the grass next to the headstone. "I'm okay, Mom. Kate and Michael are taking care of me. I promise I'll be strong and honest, just like you asked." Kate watched from a distance, feeling a lump in her throat. When Denis was done, she called him to join her at another grave, where she placed a bouquet for Ryan. "He was a great boy, you know," Kate said, looking at Denis. "I think he would have liked you a lot." Denis took her hand and looked at the grave. "I think so too." In that moment, something shifted. Denis realized that, in some way, his mother and Ryan had been part of bringing them together. They would never be forgotten, but now there was room for new memories and stories. When they got back home, Denis ran to his room, grabbed his dinosaur, and placed it next to a photo of Ellison. It was the beginning of a new chapter. but always with a piece of his old story by his side. A few months after Dennis started his new life with Kate and Michael, the house phone rang. Kate answered, and on the other end of the line was a man who identified himself as the lawyer handling Ellison's affairs. Mrs. Kate, I found something among Ellison's documents while reviewing her file. It's a letter addressed to Dennis's guardian in case she was no longer here. I thought I should deliver it to you. The next day, the lawyer arrived with a simple envelope bearing Ellison's handwriting. Kate held it carefully, feeling the weight of the moment. I think Dennis should be here for this, she said, calling the boy into the room. When Dennis saw the envelope, he froze for a moment. Kate sat beside him and encouraged him. It looks like your mom left something for you. With trembling hands, Dennis opened the envelope and pulled out the sheet of paper. He began reading aloud, his voice shaky. To whoever is taking care of my beloved boy first, I want to thank you for being by Dennis's side. He is my greatest joy and my greatest pride. If you are reading this, it means I am no longer here to see him grow, but I trust that you will be a light in his life. Dennis is a special boy. He has a heart full of kindness and deserves to be loved and guided with patience. Please help him never to lose that kindness, even on hard days. I don't know how things will unfold, but I believe that destiny places the right people in each other's paths. If you are with Dennis, it's because you needed him too, in some way. Take good care of him and tell him that I will always be with him, in every laugh, in every achievement. Dennis, my love, I love you more than anything in this world. With all my love, Mom. When he finished reading, Dennis hugged the letter to his chest, silent tears streaming down his face. Kate wrapped him in a hug and, with an emotional voice, said, She knew, Dennis. She knew you would find someone to take care of you like she would. Dennis looked at Kate and, for the first time, said what he felt. I think you're the person my mom wished for. At that moment, Michael entered the room and embraced them. It was as if, somehow, all the broken pieces had found their place. For Kate, the letter was confirmation of what she already felt. Meeting Dennis was no accident. It was as if Ellison and Ryan, from wherever they were, had guided them to each other. At the end of that day, Kate framed the letter and hung it in Dennis's room. He looked at it every night before going to sleep as a reminder that even in his mother's absence, she was still present in his life. The miracle that united Dennis and Kate was more than a coincidence. It was proof that love transcends distance, time, and even life itself. If you've made it this far, comment below, I read until the end. Share this story and help spread its emotion to more people. Just click share and let this amazing story touch others.